Welcome to Instant Deck Techs. The aim of this series is to give you a short, concise guide on how to build a certain deck. It won't cover every card, but we'll go through all the categories and go over the types of cards needed to make the deck work. Any card mentioned will be down in the description below. The commander of this deck is Dina Soulsteeper. It is black and a green for a 1/3 legendary creature Dryad Druid. It has, whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. And, pay 1 generic, sacrifice another creature. Dina Soulsteeper gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. The aim of this deck is to weaponise incidental life gain to drain out our opponents. Because Dina only ever makes our opponents lose 1 life, no matter how much we gain, we're wanting a lot of little bits of life gain rather than gaining 1 large bit of life in one go. To make the deck really synergise, we're running incidental bits of life gain all throughout the deck, so do keep an eye out for those. We'll still need, however, to run some cards dedicated to the purpose of gaining life. Again, their aim is to generate us small increments of life gain over the course of a game. These will give us lots of those individual triggers, which when they're all combined will give us some really powerful turns. You can also stay quite thematic to Witherbloom and run a lot of cards that make pests. These will be very good in the deck, as there'll be little critters we can use as fodder, then when they die, will gain us some life and activate our commander. If you're running the pest makers, then I'd look to run Ayara and Savra. As the pest tokens are black and green, when they die they'll trigger the best bits of those cards. You do have to sacrifice the creatures for Savra to trigger, but we have it built into our commander, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. What also works really nicely with the pest makers and our commander is Aristocrat life drain effects. While this deck is in no way all in on the Aristocrat build, having these in the deck gives you an extra win condition and will really add to the drain on our opponents. Again, while we're not a dedicated Aristocrat deck, having some token makers we can feed to them will be something to consider. Creekwood Liege buffs up all our creatures, Izoni's second ability will gain us life and draw some cards, and Avenger of Zendikar is just Avenger of Zendikar. And then we can also run Trudge Garden, which will let us turn any spare mana we have into making 4/4s. Our card draw will mostly either interact with life totals or be based on creatures dying, as those are 2 things we can pretty much guarantee in this deck. Things like Vampiric Rites, Skullclamp, and Moldavine Reclamation will work nicely with the tokens and the pests that we're running. Then things like Well of Lost Dreams and Cosmos Elixir will reward us for all the life that we've gained. We can then also use Greed to draw a ton of extra cards, as we'll make all that life back in no time. I've also added Disciple of Bolas and Monumentus Fall, as our commander is so cheap we can easily buff it up in a turn, sack it to one of those effects, draw a load of cards, and then replay it again later. Our ramp will be split into different sections. First up is the only rock I would want in the deck, and that is Pristine Talisman. The ramp and the life gain will work really nicely. After that is creatures that brings land into play with them. They'll synergise with the sack ability of our commander or with the Aristocrat drain effects, all while giving us the ramp that the deck needs to function. To get us up to the 8 bits of ramp the deck needs, the last slots would go to creatures that tap for mana. These aren't as good as the previous creatures, as they need to be on the battlefield to generate mana, but they still can be sacked in a push, so get in over Artifact ramp. Also noting, Accomplished Alchemist is a nice include with all that life gain. Golgari has a good selection of interaction, but to help synergise with the deck, I would look at something like what's on screen right now. Mortality Spear is a perfectly fine card, but becomes top tier removal in this deck as we can reliably gain the life needed to make it cheaper. Pest Infestation is one of the best answers to artifact or enchantments going, and again is even better in this deck where we can make great use of the pest tokens. And then we have Vraska's Contempt and Noxious Gearhulk, which will do a nice job of gaining us some life while we answer a threat. For board wipes, we can utilise cards that use life as a resource, with things like Toxic Deluge and Deadly Tempest. As with any luck, we'll have much more life than our opponents. Outside of the ones I've shown, go with the most efficient bits of interaction that you have available to you to get you up past the 8 bits of minimum interaction that you need. Moving on to some recursion, we'll be killing a lot of creatures in this deck, so we can run a few ways to recur them to keep the value train going. Vane Witch Coven and Witch of the Moors will synergise with the life gain to keep cards coming back to our hand, and then Whip Up Erebos is great at bringing back a game ender, while also giving our whole team lifelink to help trigger off our commander. Then there's also Healing Technique for some added life gain and some political fun. Moving on to some dedicated ways of winning the game, and let's start with Valentine, Dean of Vane, and its flip side, Lisette, Dean of the Root. Both sides of this card are fantastic in this deck. Early game, Valentine can disrupt our opponents while giving us a mana sink to generate our own board state, and then late game, Lisette buffs our pests and our other tokens so we can swing through for the win. After those are some redundant effects for our commander. They'll work great alongside, or instead of, in case it ever gets removed and is too expensive to recast. I've also always been a fan of Pontiff of Blight, and I think it works really well in the deck. Allowing us to dump excess mana into extort triggers to drain out the board will be fantastic, especially with our commander out. Then to buff up all our little tokens, we can run Blossoming Bogbeast, which in this deck could very well be better than a Craterhoof. We can also look at running Shadow Spear, as giving our commander trample and lifelink, along with the buff it gets from sacking some other creatures, does give a nice alternate win condition when hitting in the face. And now is probably as good time as any to mention Exquisite Blood, as it infinitely combos with our commander and a lot of the other cards in the deck. If you're going competitive and running tutors, it's something to consider, but if you don't have one, it's by no means essential. Your opponents will definitely see it coming a mile off. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, first I start with cards that gain us some life, as more will always be more in Commander. After that, I'd look at some things that draw us cards, or smooth them out with things like War Room or the Cycling lands. And then after that, you can look at running a Rogue's Passage to give an alternate win condition by making our commander unblockable. The rest of your mana base will be very dependent on what you have available to you. We've recently released a video with some advice on building a deck with a budget mana base, which might be of help. Until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments if there are any commanders you'd like to see a deck tech on. Thank you very much for watching.